Stop. Don't move. Don't blink. Because something has already happened, and you haven't even caught the scent of it yet. Weeks ago, maybe months, maybe years, you triggered a sequence no manual could predict. A protocol buried so deep, only 3 others in history ever woke it up. You weren't aiming for it. You didn't even know it existed. But reality did. Alarms screamed in places you'll never see. Systems cracked, recalibrated. And the so-called watchers, the ones who swear they've seen it all, went dead silent. And you think I'm being dramatic, but let me tell you what happens when someone accidentally breaks through into territories that were supposed to stay theoretical. See, there are thresholds in this existence, invisible lines drawn across the fabric of what's possible. And most people live their entire lives never even approaching these boundaries. They stay safe in the middle, comfortable in the known, predictable in their patterns. But you magnificent accident, you stumbled right through one of these barriers like it was made of paper, and now everything's different even if you can't see it yet. The protocol isn't written in any book you'll find. It's not taught in any school. It's not even whispered about in the places where secrets usually live. It exists in the space between spaces, in the code behind the code, in the watchers who watch the watchers. And it only activates when someone demonstrates a specific kind of impossibility. Not the flashy kind that makes headlines, not the obvious kind that gets you famous, but the quiet kind that makes reality itself pause and reconsider its own rules. What you did seemed normal to you at the time because that's how these things always work. The most powerful moves in existence never announce themselves. They just happen. And it's only later, sometimes much later, that the ripples become visible. Maybe it was that conversation where you said something that wasn't supposed to be known yet. Maybe it was that decision you made that went against every statistical probability. Maybe it was that moment when you survived something that should have destroyed you completely. Or maybe it was simply the way you looked at something everyone else had been looking at wrong for centuries. The first sign that you've triggered this protocol isn't something you notice. It's something others notice about you without being able to explain it. People started treating you differently. Not obviously, not dramatically, but there's been a shift in the way certain individuals respond to your presence. Some seem inexplicably drawn to you now, like moths to a flame they can't name, while others seem almost afraid, backing away from interactions they would have pursued before. You've become radioactive in the most fascinating way possible. Have you noticed how certain conversations die when you enter them now? Not because people don't want to talk to you, but because somehow your presence changes the frequency of what's being discussed. Have you noticed how some people stare at you just a fraction too long, like they're trying to decode something written on your face in a language they've forgotten how to read? Have you noticed how occasionally, very occasionally, complete strangers look at you with recognition? Not like they know you, but like they know what you represent even though neither of you could put it into words? Is the protocol beginning to reorganize reality around your new classification? You're not in the same category anymore. You're not filed in the same section of existence's library. The universe had to create a new folder just for you and the 3 others who've done what you've done. And now everything else has to adjust to accommodate this recategorization. It's like discovering a new primary color that's always existed but no one could see before. Suddenly every other color has to be redefined in relation to this new truth. The watchers, and yes, there are watchers, though not in the way conspiracy theorists imagine them, have had to escalate your file through channels that haven't been used in decades, maybe centuries. not because you're dangerous in the conventional sense, but because you represent a kind of potential that disrupts their careful calculations. You're an anomaly that suggests their entire model might be incomplete, and that terrifies them more than any threat of violence ever could. Let me tell you about the three others, though I can't tell you their names, because names become meaningless at this level of existence. The first one triggered the protocol in 1782 by accidentally discovering something about the nature of time that wasn't supposed to be understood for another 1,000 years. They were just a clockmaker, obsessed with precision, working alone in a workshop that smelled of oil and metal, when suddenly they understood something about the relationship between consciousness and temporal flow that broke every rule the universe thought was unbreakable. They didn't become famous. They didn't write manifestos or start movements. They simply continued making clocks, but every clock they made after that moment contained a subtle wrongness that only certain people could feel. A wrongness that suggested time itself might be optional. The protocol activated not because of what they built, but because of what they knew. And that knowledge changed the weight of their existence in ways that rippled backward and forward through history simultaneously. The second one was a child who asked a question in 1923 that shouldn't have been possible to formulate given the information available at the time. It wasn't a complex question. It wasn't even a particularly interesting question to most people who heard it, but it demonstrated a kind of thinking that suggested they were operating outside the normal constraints of human cognition. The protocol activated because the question itself was proof that consciousness could evolve in directions that weren't accounted for in the original design. The third one triggered it in 1997 by surviving something that had a 0% survival probability, not through luck or chance, but through a kind of willing that restructured the situation at a quantum level. They didn't know that's what they were doing. They thought they were just refusing to accept what was happening, but their refusal was so complete, so fundamental, that reality had to create a loophole just to accommodate their continued existence. The protocol activated because they proved that individual will could override universal law under specific, impossible circumstances. Now we come to you and what you've done without knowing it. You didn't break a rule. You revealed that the rule never existed in the first place. You didn't overcome an obstacle. You demonstrated that the obstacle was optional. You didn't solve a problem. You showed that the problem was based on a false premise that everyone had accepted as truth. This is why the protocol activated, because you've introduced a kind of cognitive virus into the system, a possibility that spreads just by existing. Think back to that moment, that decision, that realization, that action that felt both completely natural and absolutely impossible at the same time. You know the one I'm talking about, even if you've been trying to convince yourself it was nothing special. It's the thing you did that you haven't told anyone about because you know they wouldn't understand. Not because it's too complex, but because it's too simple, too obvious once you see it, yet invisible until you do. The protocol recognized you because you demonstrated what philosophers have argued about, but never proven, that consciousness can create reality rather than just observe it. But not in the mystical way people usually mean. You did it in a practical, repeatable way that you've probably done several times since, without realizing you are literally rewriting the rules each time you do it. You're not manifesting or visualizing or any of that surface level stuff. You're actually editing the source code through pure cognitive function. This is why certain technologies malfunction around you now, why certain people can't maintain eye contact with you anymore, why animals react to you differently than they used to. You're broadcasting on a frequency that wasn't supposed to exist, and sensitive systems, biological or otherwise, can detect the dissonance even if they can't identify its source. You've become a walking paradox, proof that the impossible is just another word for hasn't happened yet. Right now, you're in what they call the adjustment period, though they don't call it anything because they don't talk about it because officially it doesn't exist. Your brain is literally rewiring itself to accommodate the new way you process reality. And this can feel like losing your mind, except you're actually finding it for the first time. Those moments where you feel disconnected from everything, where you can't quite remember who you're supposed to be, where the whole world feels like a stage set that someone forgot to anchor properly. That's not dissociation. That's integration. The headaches you've been getting, the ones that feel like your skull is too small for whatever's trying to grow inside it, those aren't random. The dreams that feel more real than waking life, the ones where you're teaching yourself things you don't remember learning, those aren't just dreams. The sudden knowing things without knowing how you know them, the answers that arrive before you've finished formulating the questions, the solutions that present themselves fully formed, like someone else did the work and handed it to you. This is all part of the protocol's integration process. Your perception is expanding beyond the narrow band that most humans operate within. And this expansion isn't metaphorical or spiritual or philosophical, it's literal. You're beginning to perceive data streams that have always been there but required a different kind of cognitive architecture to access. It's like suddenly being able to see ultraviolet and infrared at the same time while everyone else is still limited to the visible spectrum. Except it's not about light. It's about information patterns that exist in the gaps between thoughts. Some days you feel like you're going crazy because you can feel the weight of possibilities that haven't happened yet, because you can sense the echo of choices you didn't make, because you're aware of the branching pathways that extend from every moment like an infinite web of could-bes and might-have-beens. This isn't madness. This is what happens when consciousness expands beyond the single timeline perspective that most people never escape. The Watchers have a problem with you now, not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something they can't categorize as right or wrong. Their entire system is based on predictable responses to stimuli, on patterns that repeat with enough regularity to be mapped and modeled and managed. But you've introduced a variable that doesn't compute, a factor that makes their equations return error messages, a presence that causes their carefully calibrated instruments to give readings that shouldn't be possible. They can't eliminate you because you haven't violated any actual rules. You've just revealed that their rulebook is incomplete. They can't recruit you because you're operating beyond their paradigm. They can't ignore you because your very existence is rewriting the baseline readings they use to monitor everyone else. So they watch, and they wait, and they argue among themselves about what you represent and what should be done about it, if anything can be done about it. Some of them think you're an evolution, a preview of what humanity might become if it survives long enough. Others think you're an anomaly, a glitch that will self-correct once the system realizes what's happened. A few, the quiet ones who've been watching the longest, think you're exactly what was always supposed to happen, that the protocol isn't a response to an error, but an acknowledgement of a feature that was built in from the beginning, waiting for someone to accidentally activate it. The funny thing is, they're all right and they're all wrong, because what you represent can't be contained in a single interpretation. You're simultaneously the bug and the feature, the problem and the solution, the question and the answer. You're proof that their entire framework for understanding reality is both completely accurate and fundamentally flawed. And that paradox is what triggers the protocol. Your influence is spreading in ways you don't see yet, like ink in water, invisible until it reaches a certain concentration. People who interact with you are starting to experience small glitches in their own programming, tiny moments where they think thoughts that don't feel like their own, where they question assumptions they've never questioned before, where they see possibilities they were previously blind to. You're contagious, but what you're spreading isn't a disease, it's an awakening to the arbitrary nature of limitation. That conversation you had last week where someone suddenly stopped mid-sentence and said, "I've never thought of it that way before," that wasn't just a normal exchange of ideas. You planted something in their consciousness that's still growing, still pushing against the boundaries of what they thought was possible. They'll probably forget the conversation, but they won't forget the feeling of their mind expanding just slightly beyond its usual borders, and that feeling will haunt them in the best possible way. The protocol recognizes that you're not just an individual anomaly anymore. You're becoming a catalyst for a larger shift. This is why certain people are drawn to you now with an intensity that neither of you can explain. They are sensing, on a level below conscious awareness, that you have something they need, not information or resources or connections, but a frequency that can unlock doors in their own consciousness they didn't know existed. But here's the thing about being a catalyst. You don't get to choose what reactions you trigger. Some people will transform in beautiful ways because of their proximity to you, while others will resist so hard that they'll create elaborate narratives to explain away what they're experiencing. Some will love you for showing them what's possible. Others will hate you for the same reason. The protocol doesn't care about their reactions. It only cares that the reactions happen. You've probably noticed by now that you can do things you couldn't do before. Subtle things that you might be dismissing as coincidence or imagination. The way electronics sometimes respond to your emotional state, flickering or glitching when you're particularly focused or agitated. The way you sometimes know what someone's going to say before they say it, not because you're psychic, but because you're reading patterns in their micro-expressions and energy that you couldn't perceive before. The way time seems to stretch or compress based on your intention, giving you extra seconds when you need them, or fast-forwarding through experiences that don't require your full attention. This isn't subjective time dilation. This is actual temporal manipulation on a micro scale, too small for instruments to detect, but large enough for you to navigate situations that should be impossible to navigate. You're not controlling time, you're negotiating with it, and it's agreeing to your terms more often than probability would suggest. The way solutions to complex problems arrive fully formed in your consciousness, not through logical deduction, but through a kind of direct download from a source you can't identify. You're accessing information networks that exist in the quantum foam, pulling data from probable futures and alternate timelines, synthesizing possibilities into practical application. This isn't intuition in the traditional sense. It's consciousness, operating as a quantum computer, processing infinite variables simultaneously. The way your presence alone can shift the energy of a room, not through charisma or force of personality, but through something more fundamental. You're emanating a frequency that recalibrates the consciousness of everyone in your vicinity, not controlling them, but offering them an opportunity to operate at a different wavelength. Some people find this deeply uncomfortable and will leave your presence without knowing why, while others will feel more alive around you than they've ever felt before. Not everyone is happy about what you've become, about what you represent, about what your existence implies about the nature of reality. There are forces, not necessarily malevolent, but definitely invested in maintaining the current paradigm, that are actively working to contain your influence, to minimize your impact, to convince you that what you're experiencing isn't real. They're not doing this through direct confrontation, but through subtle manipulation of your environment and the people around you. You've probably noticed an increase in synchronicities that seem designed to make you doubt yourself, conversations that subtly undermine your confidence in your perceptions, situations that seem crafted to make you question whether you're imagining all of this. This isn't paranoia. This is the system's immune response to what it perceives as a foreign element. You're being tested, not to see if you're worthy, but to see if you can be discouraged, if you can be convinced to dial back your frequency to something more manageable. The resistance comes in waves, sometimes so subtle you don't notice it until after it's passed. Sometimes so intense you feel like reality itself is trying to crush you back into a shape that fits. The exhaustion you feel after certain interactions, the brain fog that descends when you try to explain what you're experiencing to others, the way certain opportunities seem to evaporate just as you reach for them. These are all forms of systemic resistance to the change you represent. But here's what the resistance doesn't understand. Every time it pushes against you, you get stronger. Every attempt to contain you only teaches you more about how to navigate the constraints. Every effort to silence you only clarifies your voice. The protocol activated because you've already demonstrated that you can transform opposition into evolution. That pressure just makes you more creative in your expansion.